The Kinky Cocktail Hour is brought to you by Motor Bunny, the world's most powerful saddle-style vibrator that offers fabulous, creative sexual experiences. We use it and it rotates, it vibrates, and it delivers mind-blowing orgasms. Enjoy Motor Bunny as your favorite sex toy. When you order the Motor Bunny, multiple attachments are included along with the Link controller, which allows wireless control from anywhere. Motor Bunny is the world's most powerful saddle-style vibrator on Earth. Use the link in the show notes and spice up your sex life with a Motor Bunny. You're listening to Kinky Cocktail Hour, a conversation between adults about sex-forward relationships, kinky lifestyles, and frank communication. If you're under 18, please stop listening and visit scarletteen.com. Hi, this is Lady Petra.
I'm SafferMaster.
And this is Kinky Cocktail Hour.
Cheers.
Cheers!
So, what are we drinking today?
So, we're on this wine kick right now. So, we're going to try two Cabernet Sauvignon. And these both happen to be Washington wines.
Okay.
The first one we're going to try is Barnard Griffin in the Columbia Valley. They're both 2017s.
Okay.
So this one, I'm just going to try it and see what it tastes like. Here.
All right.
I'll pour a little bit.
Good. It's a really dark color. It's got a
It's like a rose.
silver rim. It's got a nice
red,
rose.
rose red. The
Yeah.
light, it's pretty transparent. The light comes through real well.
Yeah.
The rim is, for mine, looks silver.
Yeah, I have a silver rim too.
Okay, so
Good legs.
yeah, right away, good legs. Smell.
Oh, it's got a lovely nose.
Wow, it's a lot of fruit, like plums, and there's some spice in there.
I definitely get,
I get like
apple, stone fruit,
some real ripe, like extra ripe fruit.
cherries.
Yeah. Ooh. Light tannin.
Yeah, light tannins.
It's acidic because that's that
got
gleek,
like a citrusy.
that gleek on the top of your mouth is
Yeah.
that acid.
It's got a citrusy note. It has, I sort of pick up the coffee flavors and the toffee.
Yeah, now when you smell it, if you've tasted it, which is a big key because you actually smell differently before or after tasting, I can smell a whole bunch of other aromas. There's chocolate.
Yeah, I get a lot more of a chocolate and coffee flavor, maybe
Coffee,
molasses.
that's what it is. I was going to say coffee. Or brown sugar, something.
Yeah. No, I quite like that. That's quite good. Pretty drinkable. Go well with steak.
Yeah,
Okay,
definitely.
let's try the
Okay, so the next one is a Walla Walla. Waterbrook Vintner's selection, which is basically one of the founding wineries in Walla Walla.
It's a great winery, Waterbrook.
Yeah, and the name is drawn from the Nez Perce Indian tribe, meaning running water. So they make a big deal about the water in Walla Walla. And they say we should notice some dark fruits and dark plums.
Yeah.
And we'll see how this one fares.
The Walla Walla wines are really reliable wines because they control the irrigation, which lets them control the sugar content of the grape over there.
And the heat over there is real predictable.
Yeah.
So
Also,
this is darker.
a little darker color.
Still translucent, but darker.
It's got more of a salmon
Yeah, I see more of a salmon
rim.
to it. Great legs.
Great legs.
Really good legs, actually. That's a lot of sugar.
It's got a nice gentle nose.
So it smells,
I just
it's
get
like, you know what it is? Like that leather library room with some fruit behind it. It just smells to me like leather-bound book. Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
It's got a very established.
But look at the legs. I mean, that is incredible.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
That's beautiful. It's got a long finish. It's very light tannins.
Very
full
light
of
tannins,
fruit.
but do you see what they did with the acid? The acid hit a high note just like the other one. However, the way they have the balance of the fruit, it comes up underneath the acid and kind of brings the acid down, and then it becomes tannin at the end. That's I like that one.
Okay, we'll have that one with steak tonight.
Don't you think?
Yep.
I think that one will be really good with steak.
It's the winner.
It's the winner. So Waterbrook Vintner Selection 2017, Columbia Valley, Walla Walla.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So on to our Barnard Griffin, and we'll enjoy that.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a topic today. What were we considering today?
Well, first, what I want to say is that this is Memorial Day.
Oh, good call.
And we should acknowledge our frontline troops in this battle for COVID-19. We should acknowledge them.
Yep.
And we should acknowledge, all of the soldiers who've given their life for this country. I grew up as a student of World War II. My dad fought in the war in Africa. He was in the South African army that fought with the Brits in North Africa. Mm-hmm. And my former father-in-law was a Navy Marine, lifetime Marine, and he fought at, he was at Pearl Harbor, at Iwo Jima, at Guadalcanal, at Palelu, and he was in the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and he retired as a Navy chaplain in the end. But I just have so much respect for people who put their lives on the line. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to acknowledge that for Memorial Day.
So, and one other thing I'm acknowledging for Memorial Day is, and I posted this, was, obviously all of the military people who have died serving our country.
Yeah.
I think that's protecting our freedoms.
Yeah.
Huge. I also want to acknowledge all the 9/11 first responders.
Yeah.
To a domestic foe.
Yeah.
That lost their lives trying to help people. And then that segues right into, like you had said, our essential workers for COVID-19.
Right.
Because these people are the front lines for our health and also to feed us.
Right.
There are people out there trying to feed us, and this is it's a big deal right now across the world. But if you think about the number of cases America has compared to other regions of the world, we're a third of the.
It's quite something.
Globe.
Right.
And it's profoundly hit our country, so we need to take a breath. So wear your masks, social distance.
Wash your hands.
Wash your hands. And today I made paper poppies, just like they used to do
after World War
One. And if you get a chance to read in Flanders Field's poem, that is reflective of why the poppy even exists. And to be honest, I've been working with the government in that sector for a while, and before I did, when I would see the American Legion or different groups near Memorial Day wear the poppies that were often around during that time, I never quite knew why it was a poppy.
Yeah.
And then I became a little more educated on that. And it's pretty profound. So
it is.
So on to our topic.
Segueing to
of course.
Our topic. We've talked in the past about force and power.
Yes.
And about dominance and submission. Mm-hmm. And we haven't really spoken a lot about topping and bottoming. So first I wanted to get at what is the difference between topping and bottoming versus, dominance and submission.
Right.
And then I wanted to get into a question that I saw a writing by Nookie Notes on, just ways that dominance is abused.
Yeah.
What are the mistakes that dominants make in their expression of their dominance in a dominance and submission context? And so I thought all those things tied together as an interesting topic.
I think that's great.
Yeah. So, very simply, dominance and submission occurs where there's a power exchange.
Yep.
There's always a power exchange in dominance and submission.
Yep.
The degree of that power exchange is negotiated.
Correct.
We exist in a dynamic where we've agreed on it. we call a total power exchange. But that just denotes where the control in the relationship lies.
Correct.
Topping and bottoming is really more about the actions that occur in a sexual scene.
Like who's doing what?
Who's doing what to whom.
Okay.
So you could be a top in a scene doing something to somebody who's a bottom in the scene, but still be the submissive in the relationship. So you could top from the bottom.
Right. Okay.
Right? That's one context. Another context is as a submissive in a scene, you have safe words that let you control the intensity and the outcome of a scene in a way.
Right.
So you can sort of top from the bottom in that regard. Topping and bottoming is also terminology that's like common in the gay community. And it's about who's penetrating who.
Right. Which makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. And so, they're really like two different conversations because one is a conversation about power and power exchange, and one is a conversation about roles in a scene.
Right.
So you can be a submissive, for example, as a dominant in a scene. I could make the choice in the scene to fuck your face.
Right.
That would have me being the dominant and the top. Separately, I could invite you to suck my cock and let you sort of do whatever it is that you do.
Do the way I do it.
The way you do it.
And because I'm doing that with that freedom, you're not giving me directions or whatever.
Yeah, there's no direction. I'm just...
Then I'm topping.
You're topping.
What happens if it is directions, though? You say,
suck my
cock,
way.
And you're going to do this, this, and this. And then I follow through with prescriptive.
Yeah.
I'm not... Even though I'm doing it to you, am I topping? No. And that's the difference. Because I do know that there are some DS or MS dynamics where one of their things is there's no topping or bottoming. We're strictly DS or MS.
Yeah.
And so that's the clarification.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's like you and I have a power dynamic. And... like I'm very comfortable with you expressing yourself sexually. In fact, I want your full self-expression. I invite it.
Yeah.
And so there are times where you get pretty toppy in a scene.
Well, tell me those times. Do you think I'm very toppy?
Well, there are times.
Really?
Yes. There are. For I just the one I just use as an example, in cocksucking and face fucking.
Yeah.
Right? Like you get pretty toppy as a cocksucker.
I do, and
there's nothing wrong with
I'm
that.
toppy in my submissive role mode because I love cock torture, specifically your cock. So then I'm all into that, exploring you and the way I can arouse you.
Yes.
Newly, even.
Yeah. No, for sure. And that's topping from the bottom. Okay. In our dynamic.
Yeah. Okay.
Other dynamics have different parameters and so on. So that's kind of that's like the broad stroke.
Right.
Now, we've talked about force and power.
Yes.
And I want to differentiate. Like, force is getting you to do something that I want you to do because I want you to do it.
Because you say it or whatever.
Yeah. And I'm not really concerning myself whether you want to do it or you don't.
Correct.
That's just simply force. I'm just forcing the action. Power, which is where I prefer to be, is to get you to do something that I want you to do because you want to do it.
Yeah.
That's the difference, right?
Yeah.
So one of the troubles, one of the issues that comes up in any power relationship is this notion of manipulation. It's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? And manipulation's always a dead end. It's always bad news.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the difference between being dominant and being domineering.
Yes.
And so the way I think about it is power relationships exist in dominance and submission. Force relationships live in force and domineering.
Right.
Dynamics. So I would say anytime there's a sense as a submissive that you're feeling manipulated into being a certain way, taking a certain action, doing anything, that falls into the realm of force and domineering rather than sort of power sharing or power and dominance.
So give an example, just manipulation. And it can be insidious. It can be very discreet.
Yeah,
manipulation isn't always overt.
No, well, let's just talk about overt manipulation.
Okay.
For this moment, I want you to do something for me, and you don't want to do it. I'm trying to think of an example because you're a yes. So let's just say you don't want me to piss in your mouth. Okay. And I say to you, well, I'll either piss in your mouth or I will cane your tits, knowing that you don't want your tits caned.
Right.
And then you go, okay, well then in that case, piss in my mouth. So it's manipulative.
Sure.
I got you to do what I wanted you to do by threatening something else. Fear, whatever. And that's a really like simple black and white example.
Sure.
But like you said, manipulation can often be way more subtle.
Yeah.
Right? And so it may be that, like let's say I'm not willing to ask you to do certain things, but I want you to do them anyway. Mm-hmm. Like, for example...
So your roundabout way of doing it?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of a simple example that people can understand. Like, let's say I want you to masturbate with a Hitachi, but I don't actually ask you. But what I do is I leave the Hitachi next to your bed and ask you, perhaps what's next to your bed.
Yeah,
right.
Elude.
Like it's a bit of a silly example, but since I'm not a manipulative person, I'm having a hard time thinking like, how would I manipulate you to do something? But I can imagine there are scenarios where, like if we're going to go out, and I want you to dress more provocatively than you're comfortable dressing, I might say to you, well, that's not a very attractive outfit.
That's manipulative, yes.
You know what I mean?
Versus getting to the actual point of what you want.
Yeah.
So,
but manipulation, I categorize as bad. It's not good for a relationship.
Yeah, not healthy.
Yeah. And so, there are other sorts of relationship challenges. Like, for example, when I was talking with my ex-wife about getting divorced, we brought up the possibility of having an open relationship.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, that would have been a Band-Aid to a shitty relationship. It wouldn't have actually helped our relationship
because your communication had already got to a point where it was not working.
Right.
So unless you fixed the broken parts or became complete with the parts that were not complete,
not workable,
yeah, then they're always going to be there. They're never going to disappear. They don't just go away. They actually keep... I have to get off topic a little bit, but I had I think early this morning, lying in bed, I was thinking about Memorial Day, and I was thinking about, my kids and the ex, and I thought about this in particular, like, why does that same thread come up? Why does the same complaint come up? And I was, because it had with us too, as I was working through things anyway. I was doing more of a projection of my past into the present, so that's why it came up. But I sat there and thought about it, and I was like, oh geez, it kept coming up for 20 years because I was never complete on it. It would come up and result in a argument of some kind with no remedy. It isn't like all those complaints I had could always be remedied, but we could have had a conversation, so I could have gotten complete on it, like real honest.
There was no resolution.
And there was no resolution. So we'd argue, okay, this isn't going anywhere, box it up again and put it away. And then when things got heated or tough or our relationship weakened, that would come out of the box again because it was unresolved.
Right. Yeah. So a Band-Aid doesn't solve relationship problems.
Right. Oh, yeah.
It might just exacerbate them, you know. And so that's another way.
It's a good one.
Yeah. And then there are codependent relationships.
And that's one to talk about because with the DS-MS type of dynamic or a power exchange dynamic, this is one of the areas for vanillas looking in. They have a stereotypical response on this, like there's a reason you are seeking that type of relationship.
Right.
And I agree.
And it's always a nefarious reason.
It's always nefarious. And I do agree there are definitely, I don't want to categorize. This is really bad of me. I'm not judging. I'm just trying to categorize because it just is some trend. I think when people are younger, specifically submissives, they're exploring their sexuality, they're figuring out who they are, and there's misconceptions as you're learning that as a submissive, whether you have power or not. And the reality is a submissive is an extremely powerful person. They're not a doormat, but they learn that in the process of learning their sexuality.
Yeah.
It's much easier for a dominant just to accept, hey, I'm the shit, and that's what it is. And so then you run into the fact that the younger ones often can be pretty codependent to create an environment with a dominant that supports their self-esteem or self-worth or these kinds of things. I'm not saying others don't do that too, but a lot of times as you get older, there's certain things you let just drop to the wayside because you're not as fanatical about every single thing because you recognize who you are as an adult. But it can happen on both sides. I've seen much older submissives be extremely codependent, like life and death, codependent. And so that's a concern, but that's not just a BDSM concern. That's a concern in any relationship.
Right. So the way I think of codependency is like in a relationship that's abusive, for example.
Yeah.
Or like in a relationship where there's an alcoholic, for example. Where the partner that is the abused partner or the partner of the alcoholic behaves in a way that facilitates the abuse or facilitates the alcoholism. Or, like, for example, there may be like let's just say violent abuse in the home,
yeah,
right? And then the wife, who's the beaten spouse, apologizes for being bad.
And they can do it.
Right.
They can be apologizing to the person directly, the abuser,
or to their children, or to the other
or people. Internalizing to themselves and just say, "I'm just not worth anything,"
right.
And this is why I deserve this instance to happen to me. Because this hits home for me from the emotional abuse of my relationship prior.
Yeah,
I'm in it for almost 30 years, and I look back at it and think I don't know that person, but the reality is I was. Whatever you want to rationalize as the reason you stayed are all excuses.
Right.
I too, I'm right in there. I'm no better than anyone else. I had excuses, my excuses that I used or fell upon that I thought were extremely valid, whereas I have to wait till my kids get big and old enough because I want to get them through high school. This would not look good to the family. I'd be the first person in my whole line of family to get a divorce. Whatever stories I put out there as reasons to allow myself to stay in that situation.
Right, and so that's
codependency.
That's codependency.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and in a DS dynamic, it's pretty simple to create that codependency because it is a dominant and submissive, agreement to begin with.
Yeah,
and so there has to be a certain level of this is why I believe that you should be fully self-expressed. Like, this is why I call for your full self-expression.
Right, my autonomy on being who I am.
Because I believe you have agency, and I believe that you should have what you want in the way of the world.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And, great if you choose to submit to me.
Yeah.
But that's your choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the big difference between leaving that and we've talked about this before when we were both exploring leaving our marriages. I mean, it wasn't like one day a switch turned on and I said, okay, today's the day I'm leaving. This went on over a 10-year period of me grappling with and reorganizing who I was and what I wanted and what I thought I wanted in the future.
Yeah.
Over a period of time.
Sure. So codependency is a something that as a couple in a DS dynamic you really have to pay attention to make sure that the reasons that people are in that dynamic correlate to their choosing that dynamic and don't correlate to a feeling of
it could be hard because even as a dom you could be put into a codependency situation without creating it by a submissive who I'm not saying because I'm a masochist, so I like to get spanked and things like that. So but let's just say someone doesn't like it as much, but and they're not really masochists, but they choose to be disobedient so that they get punished.
To get the attention.
To get not only the attention or to get the validation that, see, I'm not good enough. It's reinforcing, I'm not good enough. See how I screw up all the time.
Right.
This is what happens when you screw up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I think that sort of brings us to the next part, which is this question of abuse.
Yeah.
Right. We don't want to, in a BDSM relationship or dynamic, to have a crater into a relationship that's abusive.
Right.
And we're talking about abuse, but abuse can occur in a lot of different ways.
Totally.
It can be emotional abuse, it can be physical abuse, it can be deprivation. There's just a lot of different ways that power dynamics can become abusive dynamics. And so the thing to be careful of is to not allow that to come up as a consideration in a power dynamic. And I don't know how you necessarily draw a line. Like, let's just say you're in a power relationship in a BDSM dynamic where you want to be humiliated and depraved and locked away. And like at a certain point, like, when does it become abusive? Right? So,
well, isn't that the whole point behind safe words?
Theoretically, yes.
I mean, or any dynamic could have created a construct where there are safety nets put into place, whether that's a safe word or it's a signal, or I mean, we've even talked about. So if we've talked recently about predicament type scenes.
Yes.
And so, okay, well, if I'm all bound up and gagged and blindfolded, how do I tell you? How am I going to tell you my safe word?
Right.
Or how am I going to let you know that? And we talked about the techniques of people using different things like dropping a handkerchief that they were holding or hand signals. Yeah. But again, that all has to be agreed upon
and honored.
Yeah. And like anything, trust has to be built up. And so let's just say if someone goes from 0 to 60 in the scene, you've just talked, you've made agreements, and now this person's willing to go 0 to 60.
Yeah.
I sometimes find that suspect on the true intention of that person.
But I think you hit it though. I think that in a dynamic, in a power dynamic, if the dominant isn't willing to honor a safe word, that becomes abusive instantly.
Don't you think?
Instantly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now what happens? I get the cut and dry about what you're saying. And I'm not trying to give someone an excuse. I'm not trying to do that. But I recognize what happens. So someone calls out red or...
Yeah.
and you're in deep dom space. So, I don't know, maybe you're doing lashes at that point. And it takes you a few moments to hear it.
No.
I agree. That's why, but I'm asking that question.
Yeah, no.
So you have to be, as a dominant, in a place, if you feel yourself moving to a place where you are losing control.
Excuse. No, there's no excuse.
Do you have to stop that?
No, there's no excuse.
I'm just saying, subs usually have the safe word to stop. When is it a dominant says to themselves, it's getting out of hand, I need to take a step back?
It never gets out of hand. Right. As a dominant, I've been in incredibly intense, prolonged scenes. As soon as somebody whispers the word red, it's over. Absolutely.
I agree
100%.
with you. That's you.
But that's the.
It's good construct to follow. I think
Yes.
I think it's required. But what happens if a dom has fallen into their own space?
It can't. It can't happen. You have to be responsible.
They risk possibly that relationship ending or that dynamic ending.
You risk jail. I mean.
Well, yeah, no, I get that.
You know,
I get
it
that,
can't happen, right?
You
you literally have, as a dom, have to honor, because it's all about consent. You have to honor the safe words you've agreed to.
So this would bring me up, and a little bit on topic but off, is then there's schools of thought on whether people play while under the influence.
Bad idea.
Yeah. And I think some people think, well, it'll enhance what I'm experiencing. There's one thing about being under the influence and having, plain old vanilla interactions, but to be bound or breath play or gay. No. I mean, some of those situations could be extremely dangerous.
Yeah, it's highly irresponsible. Being under the influence of, say, alcohol, for example, it impairs your judgment. Yeah, just by its nature.
And breathing.
Yeah, so, it's a really bad idea to play under the influence because it does lead to abuses. It does lead to failures of consent agreements and, disruptions of that. I would highly, I
agree with you on that.
Maybe I'm being too prudish about it, but I
don't know if it's prudish. It's a safety level. The reality is you're playing with people
in a sexual scene.
Yeah,
that
at high intensity,
out of consent is criminal.
Yeah,
if what I do
think
with
about
you,
it, when people are inebriated, even on alcohol, when they're driving, they're under the influence. They're not in a consensual mode at that point.
Right.
That's what we call it, under the influence. That means they're not able to make decisions for themselves.
Correct.
And in a consensual way, right? And so it's no different with this. And I know that there have been, as soon as I see them online, I haven't seen them since I was looking, but when I was looking, there were lots of doms that were like, hey, we can go do this and then go play. And I'm like, no. I mean, it's pretty scary.
So it'd be one thing if you and I have a trusting relationship and we agreed to do something like, I don't know, take ecstasy.
Right.
I will never play with you under the influence of alcohol. Like, I won't get drunk and play with you. I just won't do it.
Right.
Your safety is at stake.
Well, and that's the thing is I notice even just with play, because it's an energy thing too.
Yeah.
Often our play is at a certain period of the day when energy is pretty good.
Yeah.
And we're both exiting work usually, and it's time to play. And so there's a lot of space that we create for play that is not, if you remember, I remember Vanilla World was like always at night, and it was. We had already had 2 or 3 beers or 2 or 3 running Cokes. We were having sex, consensually or not. Drunk.
Yeah.
No, which is not cool.
This is very different. I mean, in a construct where you're using, chains and ropes and whips and floggers and gags and, clamps and cuffs, like being of sound mind.
You need to have that.
Especially as a dom. Yeah. Now, as a sub, you might find that you do better if you've snorted a rail of cocaine. I don't know. right?
No, thank you.
I'm saying, but as a sub, you might find that.
Yeah.
But that's not I'm not going to do that as a dom.
But that could be scary as a dom to know that your sub's under the
I
influence.
agree. I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, I can't speak for a submissive and what it takes for you to be able to let go completely. I'm saying...
but the letting go is one thing.
Yeah.
That comes with the trust of the partner, I think. But... So if you're not able to let go with the play that you have with your dominant, then there's already something wrong. The reality is you're not comfortable with the play.
Right.
You may be doing things you're not wanting to be engaged with, and there needs to be a conversation about that. That's the first thing. But secondly, as a sub with subspace existing so deeply for some people, to be under the influence and then go further into subspace...
It's very risky.
I think your communication is next to nil.
Yeah. So I think we can both agree that playing under the influence is bad.
Yeah.
Leads to abuse and leads to other things. So, there's lots of different ways to top and bottom and dominant, have power relationships. And I think the most important thing we can agree on in these dynamics is that they live in the world of consent, and where consent is broken, you got to fix that relationship. You can't go forward if your consent is honored.
I agree.
Yeah.
And there has to be agreements made. And we had mentioned this a little earlier today in discussing topics. Was I asked you, because in our dynamic we've talked about collaring and the claiming ceremony we did, and the agreements we verbally talked about and agreed upon, and that's just how we do it, right?
Our agreements were verbal.
Yep.
But there's an argument to be made to put agreements in writing.
So then I talked to you about contracts.
Right.
That's another phenomenon that happens where people draw up contracts, and I said, so why would you have to have a contract?
Yeah.
And you were explaining to me so that there's a clear understanding of the agreements that you're making.
Well, it codifies the agreements, right? So it's a good way to document the conversations that you've had about what you're agreeing to participate in, is to document them in writing. Now, you and I have created a total power exchange. We've talked about that in 1,000 different ways, and we operate
integrally within that.
With a lot of integrity, personally, right? Personal integrity. But if there was, like, if you didn't know me and you were entering into a submissive relationship with me and you didn't really have a sense of who I was as a person,
right?
It would behoove you to put the agreements in writing around things like safe words and around things like hard limits and soft limits, and around things like durations, expectations,
protocols,
etc. All of that should be.
Well, I always wondered about those because people talked about those when I was looking at originally thinking I was a slave. I looked at those a lot.
Yeah.
And I always, but one thing that always caught me, I was always like, my thinking would be as a submissive or a slave, I'm, going through training because each dominant has their own thing, right? And I have my own skill sets, but what have you, we have to mesh. So there's training. And then at some point when you're trained enough, let's just say, then the dynamic starts to shift into an organic thing of itself. It has a life of its own. And it moves. Before I had the language, like in the rabbit hole, it just moves. So how could you possibly document in a contract what you foresee when you don't know what's going to be coming?
Well, that's one of the reasons.
And that was one of the things I was like, well, yeah, but I'm answering to all these things now without knowing.
Right, but in a business relationship, what you do is you create a separation agreement.
Right.
And the reason you do that is you do it while you can agree.
Right, okay.
Because when you're in disagreement, it's hard to agree on the terms.
Right.
So you create a dissolution agreement as the first step of your partnership. So in some ways, That's what a contract is.
Yeah, exactly.
A contract is, if you violate these things, we're done.
Oh, yeah, they're very much like that. But
Yeah.
and depending on who it is, I was sent a couple contracts at one point. I mean, it was like, if this happens, that's it. And it was something so mundane. I was like,
Right.
okay, this is suspect then.
Right.
Because I am human.
Right.
And I'm not saying I'm going to do that, because I'm a pleaser, so I knew that about myself already. But I was like, but there's a lot of scenarios that could possibly happen because of out of my control things. But now you're saying in black and white that if this doesn't get done, whatever, something mundane, then that's it.
Yeah. So I think
then in that respect, I kind of felt that's pretty discardable. I'm a discardable item.
right.
No, there's no investment in me, because you're pretty black and white on this mundane thing.
Right.
Versus something that I would think would be something that would end a contract, would be something of a major thing.
Well,
A major agreement. For example, if they had said, you're going to be a house slut, this is what you're going to be, and you're always going to have your collar on, and blah, blah, blah. And maybe the agreement is when you go outside, I take it off, but when you're in the house, it's on. Refusing to wear your collar. Okay, I can see why that's it. That might be a thing. I don't necessarily agree with it, but it could be a thing. At the same time, I also learned during that process of reading those contracts is, as a submissive, that's a contract they wrote up. Just like any contract, you have a right to negotiate and to counter. You don't have to sign anything. You don't have to agree to anything. You have to say, that's a little too much.
Doesn't work for me.
What would work is, if this instance happens, can I explain myself as to why? There might be a very good reason why, and we need to be able to have a way to communicate.
No, that's why I say the important part of an agreement is the dissolution part, and you negotiate that up front so that the terms are specific. And I think, so with that in mind, I mean, it really always comes down to communication,
Yeah, I do think that for sure. And especially in those DS, MS, or top and bottom, there has to be communication there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
I'm feeling complete.
Me too.
Okay, good. That's it for today. You can find us on your favorite podcast directory. We also have an RSS feed. If you're interested in online coaching for Kinksters or online domination, you can visit our Patreon website at Lady Petra Playground. And if you're having comments or suggestions or drink ideas for our podcast, you can email me at ladypetraplayground@gmail.com.
That's it.
That's it.
Cheers.
Cheers.